Have you ever thought about how the rich feasted while the poor barely had to survive? The contrast in their food paints a picture of privilege versus struggles. Their lunches are the perfect example of division between wealth and poverty. In the 70s, people didn't have extra-large coffees and Cokes. They didn't have as many fast food options as we have today. The meals were simple back then, and people were more mindful of the food they consumed. Or so you thought. Wait till you hear what the rich people ate for lunch in the 70s. I mentioned earlier that there weren't extra-large coffees back then. While it's true they weren't extra-large, coffee was still very much a thing. People drank coffee. It's just that not all people drank the same type of coffee. The rich could afford espresso, or any coffee for that matter, but the poor weren't so lucky. They had to deal with what they could afford, and that was Nescafe. Nescafe is an instant type of coffee, which people used to make with hot milk. Just plain instant coffee and milk. That was all. Personally, I love Nescafe, but I can see how it would be considered a poor alternative to espresso. Finally, we're getting to the cooking part. Let's start with what the poor people had for lunch. This may come as a surprise, but mac and cheese, the iconic dish that stood the test of time. I know some of you may be thinking that mac and cheese isn't very budget-friendly, and I agree to some point. Some versions included macaroni in the can, while others only contained the sauce. But if you're making the pre-made version, it can be a really good meal stretch. People used to make the canned version of mac and cheese, which was, of course, cheaper. Some of those versions included the macaroni inside the can, and some contained just the sauce. But either way, you could have a decent meal for just a few dollars. The second most popular meal was meatloaf. Pretty plain and simple. Minced meat was and still is really cheap, but in exchange, it isn't the healthiest option. But that wasn't the biggest concern of our ancestors back in the 70s. People were struggling to put any food on the table, let alone a healthy one. The meatloaf was easy to prepare, and it served as a way of using any leftover food you had in the house. Just throw it all together. It'll be delicious in the end. For the preparation, people used to throw together the ground beef and mix it with an egg and some milk, although milk was optional. Then throw in some breadcrumbs or leftover oats and bake. Bonus points if you had any leftover veggies. By adding the fillers, people found a way to elevate the meal and increase its nutritional value. It isn't the fanciest food option, but you can't say it wasn't delicious. A fun fact about meatloafs is that they became popular during the Great Depression and during the 1970s. You might be familiar with this one: Spam and eggs. Spam was a popular meat product at the time of World War II. It was a meat that didn't require refrigeration. Horrific. Absolutely horrific. But even years after World War II, Spam was still one of the go-to inexpensive food items. The recipe for this meal calls for 1 can of sliced Spam. Ooh, that rhymes. Eggs and seasoning. The Spam was being fried, which sounds absolutely disgusting, and then eggs were scrambled in the same pan. That may sound awful, but it was what people had to resort to. The times weren't so lucky back then, at least not for some people. For our next meal, we have canned tuna casserole. Tuna casserole became a classic back in the 1950s and remained a popular, budget-friendly meal through the 1970s. It was easy to make, and it could feed a lot of hungry mouths. It was tricky in those times, and imagination had to run wild to keep mouths fed and happy. This dish required 2 canned tunas, 1 can of cream mushroom soup, 2 cups of cooked egg noodles, half a cup of frozen peas, and the same shredded cheese. With all these ingredients, you must be thinking that the preparation is going to be something complicated. But no, just mix all of them in a baking dish. Put it in the oven and done. In 25 minutes, you'll be having a delicious lunch on the table. The good thing about casseroles is that there's no rule book you need to follow. Just add anything you like. That's what our ancestors did. Add anything that would increase the tastefulness of the dish. Now, I know this may not sound like a lunch dish, but hear me out. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I know. That just sounds sad. And that's exactly what it is. Sad. Not all people could, at the time, afford canned tuna or ground beef. Some people had to eat what they had in the house because they didn't have the money to go out and buy new groceries. So if you had peanut butter and jelly in the house, that's what you'll be having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Of course, it wasn't like this all of the time, but when times were hard, people had to make do with what they had. Nowadays, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are a great breakfast or school lunch material, but you wouldn't catch me eating them for lunch, let alone dinner. I definitely wouldn't have survived in a low-income household back in the 70s. Instant ramen became widely available in the United States in the 1970s and quickly became a staple for budget-friendly meals. It was cheap and easy to prepare. All you needed was one packet of instant ramen noodles and hot water. Boom! There you have it. A 2-minute cheap lunch. Just add the seasoning that comes in the packet and you're ready to go. Instant ramen is one of those dishes that is going to be present in every generation, in my opinion. It's cheap and delicious, and you can make different variations of it by adding more ingredients: eggs, meat, seasoning, chives, etc. It's not the best dish when cold, but the good thing is you can make as many packs as you need without worrying about extra ingredients. All of the absolutely necessary ingredients are right there in the pack. Biscuits and gravy were a Southern comfort food that became popular in the United States for its heartiness and affordability. This recipe required a bit more cooking than the rest. So here it is. To make biscuits, you'll need to mix flour, baking powder, salt, shortening, and milk. Bake at 450 Fahrenheit for 12 minutes. As for the gravy, cook the sausage, stir in flour, and add milk. Then mix until it's thickened, and with just a bit more cooking, you have yourself a meal that will last at least a few days. Perfect for staying on a budget. Now this meal can be certified a good meal stretch. Just make more biscuits. They can last as long as you need them to. Every country has its own version of this dish, and it is highly adaptable. The famous goulash. The ingredients are fairly simple, and they consist of ground beef, onions, macaroni, tomato sauce, and diced tomatoes. Cook the onions in a pan until they are a nice golden brown color. Then add the ground beef, tomato sauce, and diced tomatoes. Stir them all together until they're properly cooked. At the end, throw it together with cooked macaroni and let it simmer for a while. It does take a bit more time, but I promise that it is worth it. The goulash is still to this day one of the favorite dishes to be served at a family lunch. A little goulash backstory. Goulash is a Hungarian dish that found its way to the hearts of all Americans in the 1970s, and it was adapted to be a one-pot dish and a budget-friendly meal for entire families. Again, really good if you're looking for a meal stretch option. And nothing, and I mean nothing, is better than a home-cooked goulash. I stand my ground with that. Again, we come to a part that may confuse you. Oatmeal. Oatmeal was a dish that could be served as a breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It was extremely cheap to make since it only really required oats, water, or milk, and if possible, some toppings. Plus, it only took 5 minutes to prepare. It was an inexpensive, hearty staple of the 70s. Oatmeal was served to entire families to provide energy for the day. Although I don't know how they could do any kind of work after eating oatmeal, I would definitely pass out. But I guess if you added some nuts and fruits to the mix, this simple dish could become a lavish meal. I just remembered a little anecdote. The first time I was making oats, I thought, why not make them with milk instead of water? I always resented the fact that my mom made them without milk. And so I did. I added bananas, honey, almonds, and cinnamon. And got this, cherries. I mean, it was truly a great oatmeal. If you choose to make my oatmeal recipe, just bear in mind you'll be running to the bathroom before you even finish your plate. A true recipe for disaster. I guess cherries and milk don't match very well, but oh, they were delicious. Moving on to Jiffy cornbread. Now, of course, it wasn't only the Jiffy cornbread mix that was used, but it was certainly the most popular. It quickly became the pantry favorite of the time. The cornbread was easy, quick, and versatile. Hence, it was served with almost any meal. You name it, chili, soup, stew. The cornbread was there. Here's a little cornbread recipe for you. Mix 3 to 4 eggs and add sparkling water and yogurt to the mix. Whisk them together until they are as homogeneous as can be. Then add the corn flour and mix until it's nice and thick. Now let your imagination run wild. You can add anything you want to the cornbread. Cheese, pickles, ham, paprika, anything you like really. The more ingredients you add, the better. My personal favorite is cheese and ham, sometimes with paprika. I don't really care for pickles. They aren't my cup of tea. Now, we're getting into disgusting territory. Most of the meals listed in this video were so far so good. Nothing too much out of the ordinary, and we still to this day eat some of the dishes mentioned earlier. But this dish is worse than the Spam. This is Scrapple. This dish originated from Pennsylvania Dutch, and it literally means everything but the oink. It was made from pork scraps. So, yes, basically it was made from pig scraps, all of them, except the oink. From the tail to the snout, everything. It was combined with flour and cornmeal and formed into a loaf or a sort of pâté. Scrapple was a part of the ethnic cuisine of the Pennsylvania Dutch, including the Amish and Mennonites. For me, it's unimaginable to put something of that sort into my mouth, but for people of the time, it was sometimes inescapable. To me, this sounds like something Dwight Schrute would bring into the office. I don't know if this next dish is less or more disgusting than the last one, but let's give it a try. Fatback. Yummy. Just kidding, it sounds horrendous. And it is literally like the name describes it. It's fat from the pig's back. It was sometimes used to add more flavor to the dishes, but at least it wasn't eaten alone. I hope. It was mostly used to increase the tastefulness of otherwise tasteless dishes. Fat is still used to this day for the exact same reason, just packaged more nicely. I guess people in the 70s weren't so different from us now. But in today's day and age, when everything has to be lean and light, fatback doesn't have much use. But the upside is that we aren't stuffing our faces with greasy and fatty food. I guess some people in the 70s didn't quite have that luxury. Actually, thinking about it a bit more, people nowadays stuff their faces with greasy and fatty food. It just looks better than it did in the 70s. We've come to the end of low-income lunches, and wow, what a journey that was. Truly horrific for some parts, but a bit nostalgic for others. I think this video inspired me to make some cornbread and goulash later. Now that we have seen what the poor were eating, let's see what the rich had in mind. The 1970s were an interesting time, especially when it came to what the rich were eating. What did the wealthiest Americans indulge in the 70s? They certainly didn't just eat to fill their stomachs. They dined to show off their status and sophistication. The food choices of the 70s elite were all about indulgence. Their tables were filled with food that represented status symbols of the era. Let's start off with an appetizer. Shrimp cocktail. Shrimp cocktails epitomized the sophistication of the 70s. It was served primarily in upscale restaurants and at lavish gatherings. It was truly a favorite amongst the elite due to its elegance and the presentation. The presentation was just as important as the taste itself. Large poached shrimp were arranged around the rim of the glass and set on crushed ice to maintain the fresh look. The cocktail sauce was a blend of ketchup, lemon juice, Worcester sauce, and sometimes a bit of hot sauce in the middle to spice things up. The hot sauce was a sort of invitation to dip the shrimp into the cocktail and enjoy the burst of flavors. The shrimp were lightly seasoned and boiled, then immediately chilled to stop the cooking process, which preserved their tender texture. This meticulous preparation was the key to having the perfect shrimp cocktail. The shrimp cocktail, oddly enough, represented the growing interest in health-conscious dining. It is interesting to see how the rich were living and drinking so lavishly, and the poor barely had enough for some so-called coffee. Moving on to foie gras. Foie gras translates to fat liver. It was a gourmet French delicacy made from the livers of ducks or geese, which were especially fattened. The origins of foie gras have been traced back to ancient Egypt, but it gained popularity through French culinary traditions. The birds are fed through a process called gavage, where they're given a diet to enlarge their liver and create a buttery rich texture. This makes the special foie gras flavor and texture it's known for, soft and smooth. In the 70s, it gained a lot of popularity as global interest in haute cuisine grew. It was often served as a pâté or terrine alongside fig jam and balsamico sauce. The sweet and savory flavor added to the luxury of the meal itself. High-end restaurants would prepare it pan-seared or torchon style, where the foie gras is wrapped in a cloth and gently poached, creating a creamy melt-in-your-mouth experience. However, the production of this delicacy is very controversial. In countries like France, it is highly regulated, ensuring that the process meets certain quality standards. These regulations then contribute to the high price of foie gras, making it a true luxury meal. But the consumption of this delicacy sparked up ethical debates concerning animal welfare, which led to foie gras bans in places like California and New York. Lobster Thermador was a French-inspired dish that gained popularity among the wealthy in the 20th century. The dish involves cooking lobster meat in a rich, creamy sauce made from egg yolks, brandy or cognac, and mustard, often with additions like cream cheese and herbs to increase the flavor. The mixture is then put back into the lobster shell, topped with more cheese, and baked until golden and bubbling, creating a luxurious combination of flavors and textures. A little fact about this dish is that it dates back to 1900 in Paris, where it was created to celebrate the debut of the play Thermidor. By 1970, Lobster Thermador became the symbol of fine dining. The presentation was equally important, as was the taste. It was a true centerpiece-worthy dish. Part of the appeal was the intense preparation and skill needed in order to prepare the lobster. Pair that with the expensive ingredients, and there you have the true delicacy. Lobster Thermador truly embodied French culinary artistry and American extravagance. I bet everyone knows this one: escargot. Escargot, a dish made from cooked land snails, was a symbol of sophistication and adventure in fine dining during the 1970s. Traditionally coming from French cuisine, the dish was embraced by upscale restaurants in America, becoming an indicator of both culinary expertise and the diner's willingness to explore unique flavors. The snails were typically prepared with a garlic and herb butter known as beurre d'escargot, which included parsley shallots and white wine. Once the snails were cooked in this aromatic mixture, they were placed back into their shells and served hot. They even had specialized escargot dishes that held each shell in place, ensuring an elegant presentation. They had really thought of everything, hadn't they? This buttery aromatic sauce paired perfectly with the slightly chewy texture of the snails, making the dish both savory and indulgent. Now let's be honest. The appeal of escargot isn't the taste. Why would you want to know how a snail tastes? No, the appeal is in the experience. And yes, imagine sitting in a restaurant in Paris and eating escargot. Or just looking at them from a safe distance. I would prefer that. This one has kind of a funny name: surf and turf. It was the epitome of luxury and indulgence in the 1970s, the duo of the finest land and seafood. It often includes a high-quality cut of meat, like filet mignon, ribeye, or tenderloin, alongside lobster tail, jumbo prawns, or scallops. Oh my, I really don't understand how people ate all that food and still stayed relatively thin. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this lavish cuisine. The origins of the dish are unclear. Some people think they stem from the rise of the American steakhouse scene, but others point in a different direction. And by different, I mean a completely different hemisphere, all the way down to Australia. The preparation varied from restaurant to restaurant. The steak could be pan-seared or grilled, and the lobster could be broiled, grilled, or butter-poached. But nothing would be delicious without the various sauces. From béarnaise and hollandaise to garlic butter, sauces were the ones making this dish extremely tasteful. This pair was really out there and conquering the culinary world. The mixture of savory beef flavors and the sweet, delicate taste of seafood elevated this culinary experience. Veal Oscar was a dish that originated from the Scandinavian culinary traditions. Named in honor of King Oscar II of Sweden, it is a multi-layered, refined entree that became a staple in high-end dining throughout the 1970s. The dish consists of tender veal cutlets, typically pounded thin and pan-seared to a golden brown, which forms the base layer. The veal is then topped with premium crab meat, either Dungeness or blue crab. I don't know about you, but all this seafood and snail talk has got me feeling sick. Yuck. Anyway, let's continue. Asparagus spears are laid on top not just for their flavor, but also for their vibrant green color, which provides a visual element of elegance to the dish. The final touch is a rich béarnaise sauce made from clarified butter emulsified with egg yolks and spiced up with herbs. This really is quite a delicacy. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather have some mac and cheese. But nonetheless, it was a pretty popular choice in steakhouses and continental restaurants. Veal Oscar contributed to the growth of American interest in global cuisines in the 70s. Salmon Wellington, also known as salmon en croûte, is a refined dish where salmon is wrapped in puffy pastry and baked until golden brown. Can you guess where it originated from? If you guessed France, you would be correct. It became highly popular in the 70s for its elegant presentation. The salmon was usually marinated in herbs like dill and lemon zest, sometimes even Dijon mustard for a little spice. Before being wrapped, the salmon is often topped with spinach, mushrooms, or cream cheese mixed with herbs, which gives this dish moisture and freshness. There's a variation of the dish in which the salmon is wrapped in crepes before the pastry in order to help with the moisture. And of course, we can't forget the serving since it was extremely, and I mean extremely important. Salmon was served with a light, creamy sauce such as white wine, dill, or beurre blanc sauce. These sauces complemented the delicate fish taste and elevated this dish to a luxurious level. Moving on to the king of salads, crab louise. This is a classic American dish that originated from the West Coast, specifically in San Francisco. It became a favorite around the 1970s for its fresh and luxurious ingredients. It uses one of the most exotic breeds of crab that you can hope to catch in the ocean, the Dungeness crab. This type of crab is usually known for its sweet and tender texture, and it is typically served chilled on top of iceberg lettuce. Ooh, just imagine that big crunch. Usually, this dish is served with lettuce, hard-boiled eggs, and tomatoes. But the real magic is the Louise dressing, which is made from heavily whipped cream, finely diced green pepper, and sometimes horseradish. Speaking of authenticity, we are not even sure who to pay respects to for this dish. Most people just agree that it popped up in the 20th century on the West Coast and peaked in the 50s to 70s. The earliest reference we can find is Clarence Edwards' Bohemian San Francisco in 1914. Tornados Rosini is one of those dishes we would now call over the top. This meal is here to steal the show. It is named after an opera composer from Italy known as Gioino Rossini, and the dish itself is a melody of flavors. It is served in a reduced wine sauce with shallots. You may be thinking, well, what's it made from? It's not beef nor chicken, but it is pheasant. Yes, that's right. Pheasant. Now, we don't see much of that in today's day and age, but back in the 70s, this was quite a showstopper. Steak Diane was one of those highly popular dishes back in the 70s. Well, at least amongst the rich. This dish was characterized by a rich, buttery sauce made with a mixture of pan juices and cognac or brandy. The name Diane is believed to have originated from the Roman goddess of the hunt, symbolizing the dish's robust and hearty nature. What sets it apart from other steak-type dishes is the preparation that happened right before your very eyes. In an era when dining out was becoming a form of entertainment, the flamboyance of Steak Diane added a theatrical element to the meal. This technique involved igniting the alcohol in the sauce, creating a burst of flames that captivated diners. The visual appeal was as important as the taste, making Steak Diane a symbol of luxury and sophistication rich in flavors and aromas. It combined the savory taste of perfectly seared steak with the complexity of its sauce, creating a taste profile that was both bold and refined. Steak Diane's popularity was also due to its versatility and how it could be presented. Chefs experimented with various side dishes like mushrooms, garlic mashed potatoes, or steamed asparagus. The appeal of steak, Diane, also comes from the fact that it bridges the gap between traditional and modern cooking. The sauce brings us back to the classic French cuisine, while the tableside preparation gives it a modern touch. The mixture of both worlds, Old World and New World, makes Steak Diane a favorite amongst people looking to impress with both culinary skills and taste. It had originally become popular in the middle of the 20th century, but it was given a new life due to its nostalgic value. For those of you who are brave enough to try and cook this at home, I am sure that your guests will be greatly surprised. It is not every day that you get a chance to eat a meal of this caliber. You can find the exact recipe in almost any cookbook since it was very popular back in the day. Of course, the recipe is simplified for home cooking, but don't be fooled by that. You'll still be standing over that stove for hours. Steak Diane remains a nostalgic dish and a staple of fine dining in the 70s. Duck à l'orange became one of those iconic dishes in the 70s. It was maybe the peak of fascination for French cuisine. It was known for its amazing taste palette. The rich, savory duck meat complemented by the sweet orange sauce was a staple for high-end dining, and you could find it only at the most exclusive restaurants. The preparation for duck à l'orange was complex and time-consuming, plus it required expert culinary skills in order for the dish to have perfectly balanced flavors. The duck itself was usually roasted, which allowed it to have crispy skin and tender and juicy meat. But anyone can make a roasted duck. The key to this delicacy is the sauce. It was made from fresh orange juice, zest, and the reduction of stock, vinegar, sugar, and sometimes even a splash of Grand Marnier to enhance the citrus notes. It was loved by all, and the reason for this stems from the fact that duck à l'orange was a combination of luxury and tradition. Ducks were always associated with French cuisine, and the preparation added a modern twist to an otherwise classic dish. This meal was seen as a sophisticated choice, appealing to those with refined palates. Duck à l'orange was sometimes served with thinly sliced oranges and fresh herbs, arranged with great thought in order to create a visually stunning plate. It wasn't all about the taste, but about the aesthetics as well. In some restaurants, the duck was carved tableside, enhancing the diner's experience. This ritual didn't only highlight the chef's skills, but it also made the diners more engaged in the meal preparation. This dish also played a role in social gatherings, as it was often the meal choice for dinner parties and special occasions. And how could it not? It looks like something straight out of a movie. And once again, everyone was expecting this one: caviar and blennys. It was the epitome of luxury dining in the 70s. Caviar and blennys represented the taste for finer things amongst the wealthy. Caviar, if you didn't know, is the salted roe of sturgeon and was highly prized for its delicate texture and rich flavor. The flavor and texture varied depending on the type of sturgeon and its origin. Beluga, ossetra, and sevruga were the most wanted varieties, and they were sourced from the Caspian and Black Seas. I'll take a wild guess and say that most of you don't know the different types of caviar, and neither did I until researching this video, so let me explain. Beluga caviar has large soft eggs and offers a buttery flavor, while ossetra caviar provides a nutty and firm texture. Sevruga is the smallest, and it's known for its strong and salty flavor. Now, what the hell are blennys? Maybe I'm just too poor to know these kinds of foods, but allow my poor self to explain. Blennys are traditional Russian pancakes made from buckwheat or wheat flour. They were the perfect little caviar transporters. Their soft base complemented perfectly the richness of the caviar, which created the perfect harmony of tastes. The blennys always had to be fresh and warm to contrast nicely with the coldness of the caviar. You might think, well, they're just small pancakes. What more is there? Well, they had to be prepared really carefully, because overmixing them could result in them being tough, which would completely take away from the whole experience. Blennys were traditionally served with a dollop of crème fraîche, chopped onions, hard-boiled eggs, and sometimes a squeeze of lemon juice to enhance the caviar's natural flavor. But the pairing of caviar and blennys wasn't just for the taste, it was for the ritualistic experience. The same with escargot. And once again, I'll pose the same question. Why, oh why, would you want to know what fish eggs taste like? At least the caviar doesn't look as disgusting as escargot. Let's end this video with something sweet. The favorite dessert of the time was Baked Alaska. It was a show-stopping dessert that became the height of elegance and spectacle in the 1970s, known for its dramatic presentation and contrasting textures. The dish was composed of 3 distinct layers: a base layer of sponge cake, a middle layer of ice cream, and an exterior coating of meringue. The key to Baked Alaska's allure lies in its unique preparation. The meringue acts as a protection for the ice cream. It prevents it from melting. The meringue is whipped until stiff peaks appear, which adds to the light and airy texture. One of the most theatrical ways to serve Baked Alaska is by flaming it tableside. A liquor, usually rum or brandy, is poured over the meringue and set alight, resulting in a short-lived blaze that impresses diners and caramelizes the meringue without affecting the ice cream underneath. The dessert was popularized in the 19th century to celebrate the acquisition of Alaska by the United States, but it reached peak fame during the mid-20th century. By the 1970s, it was synonymous with luxury, highlighting the growing trend of dining as performance art. I guess even then, people wanted to make a spectacle out of their meal. We're not that different now after all. By the way, if you even care, this is my favorite rich people dish from this list. Or, to be more precise, the only rich people dish I liked from this list. I think that may say more about me than about the dishes. Wow. Now that we've gone through all of that, I can finally ask, what the hell was that big liver? One thing I know for sure. People nowadays wouldn't have survived in the 70s, no matter rich or poor. Have you thought of the meal you'd miss the most if you time traveled back to the 70s? If you did, leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.